We are here tonight to read chapter 4, and I'm going to say the verse, 1 Samuel 2:30. Ching chong ching ching chong ching cha chung ching ching chong ching. It's in Chinese. Just kidding.
Why does it say
I don't know Chinese.
There? Why does it say
All right. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. 1 Samuel 2:30. We are on chapter 4, something even more important, page 41. Eric Liddell. On April 6, 1923, Eric Liddell introduced his younger... I don't know why my nose itches so terribly. Eric Liddell introduced his younger brother to 80 men who had gathered in the Armadale Town Hall. The men cheered as Eric stood up to speak. Eric shifted nervously from foot to foot. He hated being the center of attention. For a moment, he just stood and said nothing. Then he took a deep breath and began. He didn't speak the way a preacher did from the pulpit or a teacher in the schoolroom. Instead, he spoke quietly, as if chatting with a good friend. He spoke about how God was in control of his life and how he accepted whatever happened to him as God's best for that time. He also spoke about how much he knew God loved him and everyone sitting there in the town hall. Then he thanked him for listening and sat down. To Eric's surprise, the next day, every newspaper in Scotland carried a photo of him and a report on his talk in Armadale. The man who disliked drawing attention to himself was now more famous than ever. Once Eric had given his first Christian speech, churches and groups everywhere began asking him to come and speak. The next week, Eric found himself at another town hall, this one in Rutherglen on the outskirts of Glasgow. This time, 600 men showed up to hear him. Eric gave them the same simple message he had presented in Armadale, told in the same simplest way. As he stood in front of the crowd in Rutherglen, Eric realized that he had been given a gift, the gift of fame, and that he could use it to share the gospel message with thousands of people. From that moment on, he was never again shy about standing in front of a crowd to speak. Indeed, he tried to accept every speaking invitation he got. If Eric thought his life was busy before, it was hectic now. During the week, he attended lectures and studied for his degree. On the weekends, he would go to track meet and arrange to speak at meetings on the way there and back. Some sports writers began writing that Eric Liddell was trying to do too much and that in the end, his running would suffer. But a person had only to look at the races Eric was running in Scotland and see that wasn't true. In fact, it seemed just the opposite. The more time Eric gave to speaking, the faster he ran. When asked how he ran so fast, he often told people that he ran as fast as he could for the first half of the race and then asked God to help him run even faster for the second half. I'm going to start doing that. Somewhere in the mind of every schoolboy or schoolgirl who has ever won a race is the tiny dream that one day he or she might win an Olympic medal. Eric had this dream for a long time. So when the trials for the British team to attend the 1924 Olympic Games were announced, he was anxious to try out for the team. The trials were to be held in Stamford Bridge, London, in early July 1923, and the Olympics themselves were to be held in Paris exactly a year later in July 1924. Although Eric was the best sprinter in Scotland, he wasn't automatically assured of place on the Olympic team to represent Great Britain. Great Britain was made up of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and each of these countries had its own great athletes. The only way to secure a place on the team was to be one of the first 3 finishers in your event at the British Championships and Olympic trials in Stamford Bridge. Eric did that and more. He won both heats and both finals, and in the process set a new British record for the 100 yards of 9.7 seconds. This record would stand for 35 years until Peter Radford bettered it by a second. Eric finished the 220-yard race in 21.6 seconds, his best time ever over that distance. At the end of the competition, he was rewarded with the Harvey Cup for the best athlete. of the year, and, of course, something even more important to him, a place on the British Olympic team. He was entered in both the 100-meter and the 200-meter races. The Olympic Games use metric measurements to measure the distance of the various events. A meter is approximately 3 inches longer than a yard. After the team was announced, newspapers all over Great Britain blazed with stories about Britain's best hope for gold medal in a 100-meter race. The following weekend, the newspapers were announcing even more startling news. Eric had performed a miracle. At least that's how it looked in the spectators at Stoke-on-Trent. Eric was representing Scotland in a competition against Ireland and England. He was entered in the 440-yard race, a distance of once around the track. Eric hardly ever ran this distance in competitions, and he was not favored to win. He drew the inside lane, the best lane for the race, as usual before the start of the race. He shook hands with each contestant, finishing with J.J. Gillies, a runner from England. Gillies was running in the lane next to Eric. When the starter's gun cracked, both Gillies and Eric got off to the fast start, but it took only a second for disaster to strike. J.J. Gillies, anxious to get into the good position in his lane, bumped into Eric and knocked him over the grass in the center of the track. A gasp went up from the spectators. Gillies managed to regain his balance and keep running, but Eric lay on the grass. The race was over for him, or so he thought. He assumed he had been disqualified. Suddenly, though, he caught a glimpse of one of the officials waving frantically for him to get up. Apparently, he was not disqualified, so he sprang to his feet and sprinted off down the track toward the other runners, who were now at least 20 yards in front of him. Since such races are won by inches, it seemed impossible for Eric to be able to catch up. But somehow, Eric just got faster and faster. Soon the crowd was on its feet, roaring with excitement. Was it possible that Eric could catch up with the others? Yes. He powered past the stragglers in the race. With only 40 yards to go, he was in fourth place. He flung his head back even farther than normal and willed his legs to pump faster. His legs obeyed. As the runners headed down the home straight, Eric moved up until he was neck and neck with the leader. Then, with a superhuman burst of speed, he dashed across the finish line in first place. Eric collapsed onto the track, totally exhausted, as his coach and teammates carried him off to the field on a stretcher. The crowd rose to its feet and cheered on their new champion. Eric Liddell's race that day has been called the greatest quarter-mile race performed of all time. Eric returned to the hero's welcome in Scotland. Once again, he made the Scottish people around, and his country eagerly awaited the Olympic Games to see their hero win the gold medal in the 100 meters. Things didn't work out quite that way. However, one morning in April 1924, 3 months before the start of the Olympic Games, Eric received a list of the events he was entered in. Beside each event, the times for the heats and the finals were indicated. Beside the heats for the 100-yard sprint was one fateful word: Sunday. Eric stared at the page for a long time. Sunday. It definitely said Sunday. Eric's heat to qualify for the final would run on a Sunday, but Eric would not run on a Sunday. There was no doubt about it. In his mind, his coach in the Scottish Athletic Association already knew that he did not run races on Sundays. He never had, and he never would. Since his earliest memory, he had been taught that Sunday was a day of rest and a day of reverence for God. All his life, Eric had honored in that teaching. Sunday was God's day, and nothing, not even the promise of a gold medal, was going to sway him from that belief. Eric informed the British Olympic Committee that he couldn't run in the 100-meter sprint. The newspaper quickly blazed, that was a surprise attack yawn. The newspapers quickly blazed out the news that Eric Liddell had refused to compete for the gold medal in the 100 meters. Now the public, who had admired him for his running ability and his character, turned on him fiercely. Some people even called him a traitor for his country, a man unfit to represent Scotland. Eric was crushed by the cruel things people said about him, but he would not change his mind. As far as he was concerned, he would not run on Sunday. And that was all there was to it. To make matters worse, the dates for the 2 relay heats were posted soon afterwards. Both the 4x400 meter and the 4x100 meter relays were to be run on Sunday, true to form. Eric refused to run in them as well. The British Olympic Committee met privately with the organizers on the Games in Paris, but it seemed there was a little they could do about the scheduling of events. If a contestant refused to run on one particular day, the organizers didn't see it as their problem. Eric accepted this. It was his choice, and so, too, were the consequences of it. Meanwhile, the British Olympic Committee decided to try to make the best of a bad situation. It asked Eric to consider running the 200-meter and the 400-meter races, even though he would not be favored to win a medal in either event. Eric agreed. The committee also stepped up its support of Harold Abrahams, the English runner, who was still entered in the 100 meters. Harold was not as fast as Eric, but he was the best Great Britain had to offer under the circumstances. While all this was happening, other things were going on in Eric's life. Robert had graduated from medical school and had been accepted for a position as missionary doctor serving with the London Missionary Society in China. The brothers separated, not knowing how long it would be before they would see each other again. After arriving in China, Robert wrote to Eric about the turmoil the country was in the midst of. A fierce struggle for political power was going on, and as usual, it was the peasants, farmers, and poor people who suffered the most as a result. These people needed as much help as they could get. As he read the letter, Eric made a decision there and then. He decided to follow in his family's footsteps and become a missionary to China. He wasn't sure where he should go in China, so he made plans to go first to Tientsin, where he had been born and where his parents were now stationed. There he could live with his family while he got established. Quietly, without telling anyone, he wrote away to the Anglo-Chinese College in Tientsin to ask if they needed the services of a science teacher or a sports coach. He knew as he posted his letter that he would have to wait several months for a reply. This was fine with him because he had a lot to do while he waited, to allow him to attend the Olympics and still graduate on schedule. Eric's professors had let him hand in assignments ahead of time. This, however, meant a lot of extra work for Eric, not to mention keeping up his training for the games. Finally, all the hard work was behind him, and Eric joined the British Olympic team for the voyage across the English Channel to Paris. On board the boat, many of the other athletes on the team privately told Eric that they admired his stand against running on Sunday. Eric appreciated their support, even if they didn't express it out loud or to the press. Saturday, July 5th, 1924, was a very hot day in Paris. It was also the day that the 8th Olympic Games of modern times were officially opened. The Olympic Games had originated in Athens, Greece, in 776 BC, to honor the 12 gods, especially Zeus, the most powerful of them all, who, according to myth, lived on Mount Olympus. The games were held every 4 years and consisted of a day of running races and wrestling matches. Eventually, in AD 393, they were banned by Roman Emperor Theodosius. At the end of the 19th century, a Frenchman, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, made it his mission to bring back the Olympic Games. This time, every country in the world would be invited to send contestants, and many sports would be played. The idea caught on, and in 1896, the first of the modern Olympic Games was opened in Athens. The Games had been held every 4 years since then, except for 1916, when they were canceled because of World War II, and in 2020 because of stupid COVID. Over the years, several changes were made to the Games. The 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm, Sweden, were the first to allow women to compete, and the 1924 Paris Olympics was the first to include winter sports. Of course, the winter events were not held in the sweltering summer heat of Paris. They were held in French Alps at Chamonix. Each country also had its own rules about entering the games. The United States poured a lot of money into helping its contestants. The U.S. government hired an ocean liner, the USS America, to take the U.S. team to the Olympics. The ship had a special 200-meter cork track installed on board so that the athletes could continue their training. Once in Paris, the American team had the best accommodations and plenty of money to pay twice or even 3 times the going rate for a taxi. Because of this, the other teams often found it difficult to get a taxi to take them to Column Stadium, where the games were being held. If they weren't Americans, the taxi drivers didn't seem interested in taking them. Many of the other contestants often had to resort to flagging down private cars and begging for a ride to the stadium to compete in their event. 1924 was also the first year the British government helped its competitors pay for their travel and accommodations. Until this time, each competitor had paid all or his own expenses, to compete in the games. It was a good thing that the British government had decided to change this because Eric would never have been able to come up with the money necessary to cover his expenses. During the opening ceremony, Eric marched proudly to the Column Stadium with the rest of the British team. The Union Jack fluttered lightly over them. The team was dressed in blue and white, the women with white skirts and blue blazers, and the men in white pants and the same blue blazers. The men also wore white straw hats. The drone of bagpipes played by the king's own pipers filled the air as the athletes marched in. Fun side note, I am a drummer, and I played drums in a bagpipe band. True story. Each male member of the team took off his hat as a sign of respect as the team passed the podium where the French president and Baron Pierre de Coubertin stood watching. One by one, the rest of the teams marched into the stadium until all 45 teams were lined up side by side in the center of the field. Some teams were huge. The U.S. team alone had over 400 competitors. On the other hand, China had sent only 2 athletes, and Haiti 1. The lone Haitian had to carry his own flag as well as be the entire team. Go Team Haiti! Haiti. Go Team Haiti. As the hot afternoon sun beat down, the opening ceremony began. Baron Pierre de Coubertin declared the games open. Cannons boomed. Thousands of pigeons were released, and the Olympic flag was hoisted into the hot, stagnant air. The 60,000 spectators cheered. The 1924 Olympic Games had officially begun. As the teams were about to march out the stadium, Lord Cadogan, head of the British Olympic Committee, strolled over to the British team and wished the members all luck. As he moved among the team members, shaking their hands, he stopped right in front of Eric and in a loud voice declared, "To play the game is the only thing in life that matters." Lord Cadogan looked directly at Eric as he spoke. And Eric got the point. Eric Liddell had thrown away a gold medal for Britain, and there were many who would never forgive him for it. As a result, Eric left the stadium that day a little less excited than when he'd arrived, but he still marched out with his head held high. No one, not even the English nobleman, could tell him a game was the most important thing in life. It wasn't. Eric didn't care what people thought of his decision, yet he was also determined to do his best in the races he was entered in and would wait and see what the outcome was. The outcome would be worth every bit of effort he had put forth.